The CD Howe Institute predicts Ottawa's recently announced spending plans, which includes a much bigger defense budget, will drive its deficits higher in the coming years. In a new analysis released on Thursday, the think tank says it expects Canada's deficit to top $92 billion this fiscal year, given Prime Minister Mark Carney's plan to meet NATO's defense spending target of 2% of GDP. For more on this, our correspondent Wyatt Sharpe has the latest. All yours, Wyatt.
The federal government's bold commitment to boost Canada's defense budget appears poised to come with a hefty price tag. According to a fresh analysis by the respected C.D. Howe Institute, Ottawa's latest fiscal package, which prominently includes a sharp rise in defense spending to meet NATO's 2% of GDP target, pushes Canada's projected deficit well beyond previous estimates. This fiscal year, the Institute warns Canada could run a deficit exceeding $92 billion, driven primarily by the $9 billion defense bump announced by Prime Minister Mark Carney. That figure is staggering, roughly double the shortfall projected by the Parliamentary Budget Officer before the spring election. Over the next 4 years, the C.D. Howe Institute forecasts annual deficits averaging around $78 billion, again more than twice the PBO's prior estimates. The Institute's president and CEO, William Robson, calls the government's fiscal pivot a, quote, radical change in the nation's finances with long-lasting adverse consequences. He and his colleagues argue that Canadians deserve clarity, not just lofty promises. Quote, the government must provide the information needed, warns Don Drummond, of course, a fellow in residence at the Institute. But what are the broader implications? First, the spending increase extends beyond military hardware. In late June, Mark Carney's government also enacted lower income taxes and sped up major infrastructure projects, and all of it compounds the fiscal strain. Secondly, balancing priorities becomes a growing challenge, as the C.D. Howe Institute's 2025 shadow budget emphasizes. A strategic reevaluation of non-defense spending is vital if Canada hopes to maintain fiscal discipline while funding defense and critical services. On that front, Ottawa has framed the defense expansion not just as a geopolitical necessity, but as economic stimulus, positioning military investment as a driver of jobs, industrial capacity, and Canadian sovereignty. Think of submarines, aircraft, Arctic infrastructure as well, and contracts sourced domestically. However, Robson is blunt, saying, quote, Canadians need to be engaged now in a debate over Canada's fiscal future. This comes, of course, without rigorous planning and without a lot of transparent reporting. He warns of, quote, costly commitments, and he risks that Canada could end up becoming fiscally irresponsible more so than we already are, which of course raises the pressing question, will a larger defense footprint alongside tax cuts lock in Canada into kind of a more persistent high deficit path, or will Ottawa ramp up economic growth, squeeze inefficiencies, and find a smarter balance between security and sustainability? With the federal fiscal update now delayed until fall, the government faces mounting pressure to lay out the nitty-gritty dollar-by-dollar kind of in-depth details of all of this, of when and how deficits will actually end up coming down. Prime Minister Carney, an economist, of course, by trade, former governor of the Bank of Canada and England, has long framed the move as prudent, as, kind of a way of economic statecraft, as he had described over the course of the election as well. But critics are arguing that all of this really can, put at risk kind of Canada's level of fiscal responsibility. They're arguing that it will hinge Canada's hinging on whether the government can demonstrate results, not just promises. And as Canada marches toward its NATO spending goal, which you saw both at the G7 and at the NATO summit in Netherlands of 5% of GDP, which is the new goal, and grapples with allied calls for new 5% defense benchmarks by 2035, domestic confidence will depend on Ottawa's ability to squeeze the books without shortchanging Canadians. That is the debate that is underway now. We're going to stay on it and keep you posted. For now, Theresa, we'll send it back to you.